Jack Coleman had seen plenty of strange things in his time, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer absurdity of what he was looking at now. It was a letter, thick, official, and stamped with a logo that made his stomach churn with irritation. The Homeowners Association? That was laughable. He lived on 1,700 acres of farmland, not some manicured suburban cul-de-sac. But as his eyes darted over the words, his confusion twisted into something much sharper. According to the letter, his entire farm had been sold. The land that had been in his family for generations, the place he had poured his sweat and soul into, had somehow been taken from him, by an HOA he never even agreed to be part of. He read it again, then again, willing the words to make sense. Due to non-payment of HOA fees, your property has been sold to developers for community expansion. You have 30 days to vacate. Jack let out a short, humorless laugh. It wasn't a mistake. These people were serious. Someone out there believed they had the authority to steal his land, sell it, and tell him to pack his bags like a tenant being evicted from an apartment. Jack clenched the letter in his fist, his jaw tightening. If this was some joke, it wasn't funny. If it wasn't, then someone was about to have a very, very bad day. By the time he stormed into the HOA office, he was still debating whether he should laugh or start flipping tables. The receptionist, a woman with the practiced plastic smile of someone who thrived on unnecessary rules, looked up and barely concealed her look of disdain. "Can I help you?" she asked in the slow, condescending tone people reserved for someone they considered beneath them. Jack slapped the letter onto the desk. "Yeah. You can start by explaining how the hell an HOA I don't belong to thinks they can sell my damn farm." Her fake smile barely wavered. "Ah, you must be Mr. Coleman. Please wait while I get Ms. Wilkins, our HOA president." He didn't wait. He followed her straight into a pristine office where a woman in her mid-50s sat behind a mahogany desk, filing her nails like she wasn't ruining people's lives for sport. Brenda Wilkins barely glanced up. "Mr. Coleman," she said in the overly sweet voice of someone who thought she was untouchable. "I assume you're here about the property transfer." Jack let out a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "The illegal property transfer," he corrected. "I don't have an HOA. I never agreed to one. So you're going to explain to me how you think you have any right to sell my land." Brenda sighed like he was being dramatic. "It's quite simple, Mr. Coleman. Your land was annexed into our gated community expansion after a town council vote." She gestured vaguely. "All legal. We sent notices." Jack's eye twitched. "What notices?" Her smile was all teeth. "We mailed them to the address on file." Jack stared at her, then gave a short laugh. "The address on file? You mean the one that's literally on the land you stole?" She gave a nonchalant shrug. "Well, if you didn't read your mail, that's hardly our fault. And considering the HOA fees were unpaid." Jack cut her off. "There were no HOA fees because I don't have a damn HOA." Brenda let out an exaggerated sigh, clearly finding this all beneath her. "Mr. Coleman, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. The property has been legally transferred. You have 30 days to vacate. We're even offering you a relocation stipend as a courtesy." She slid a check across the desk. Jack picked it up. $500. They'd sold his family's land worth millions, for $500. He stared at the check. Then at her. Then back at the check. And then he did the only thing that felt appropriate. He laughed. Not just any laugh. A deep, gut-busting, uncontrollable laugh that only got louder the longer Brenda stared at him with her lips pursed in irritation. "You think this is funny?" she asked. Jack wiped his eyes. "Brenda," he said, still chuckling. "You have no idea." He leaned in, voice low. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Mr. Coleman, we're done here." He didn't argue. Instead, he plucked the check off the desk, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it over his shoulder as he walked out. Jack drove straight to his lawyer, who didn't even bother hiding his horror when he saw the documents. "They forged signatures," his lawyer muttered, flipping through the papers with increasing disgust. "Bribed the right people. These contracts wouldn't hold up in a fair trial." Jack crossed his arms. "Great. So let's take them to court." His lawyer let out a long sigh. "Jack. This isn't a fair trial situation. These people have deep pockets and political connections. Even if we fight it, it could take years to undo." Jack's fingers drummed against the desk. He wasn't the kind of man who backed down from a fight, but he also wasn't stupid. A legal battle was expensive, and it didn't guarantee he'd get his land back before they bulldozed it into a cookie-cutter suburbia nightmare. But there was one very important thing Brenda and her smug little HOA didn't know. Jack owned more than just the land. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a separate deed, one they never even thought to check. His lawyer took it, eyes scanning over the paper before he froze. Jack. His voice was almost giddy. Is this what I think it is? Jack grinned. It sure is. His lawyer sat back, shaking his head in awe. They really screwed up. Oh, they did more than that, Jack said, standing up and stretching. They just sold a property that doesn't have a single drop of water on it. His lawyer let out a low whistle. And the only water supply for that entire community. Jack's grin widened. Is sitting right on my other land. The one they didn't steal. There was a long, satisfied silence. Then his lawyer let out a sharp laugh. Well, this is gonna be fun. Jack tipped his hat. You have no idea. Jack woke up the next morning with the kind of determination that only comes from knowing you hold the winning hand. The HOA thought they had backed him into a corner, but they didn't realize they had actually locked themselves in a burning building with no exit. The moment he stepped outside, he took a deep breath of the crisp country air and smiled. Today was going to be a bad day for Brenda Wilkins. He made the call just before noon. Within an hour, the pipes leading to the HOA's water supply were officially shut off. Not a single drop of water would make it past the boundary of his property. Legally, there was nothing stopping him. The HOA had annexed his land without his consent, sold it off to developers, and in doing so, they had forfeited their rights to the well that sat on his other property. It wasn't just a move for revenge, it was business. They wanted water. They could pay for it like any other private entity. The first call came from an unknown number. Jack let it ring. Then came another. Then another. By the fourth call he finally picked up, putting the phone to his ear with a lazy grin. Mr. Coleman. Brenda's voice was no longer sweet or condescending. It was sharp, barely masking the panic underneath. We seem to be having an issue with the water supply in our community. Jack played dumb. Water supply? You don't say. Brenda took a deep breath as if she were trying to suppress the urge to scream. Yes. The entire community is experiencing an outage. Jack nodded to himself. Well, I hate to hear that, Brenda. That's gotta be rough. You should probably call the water company. There was a pause. Jack, she said, her voice dangerously low. You are the water company. Jack let the silence stretch out, enjoying the weight of her realization. Then he cleared his throat. Oh yeah. That's right. That well does belong to me, doesn't it? He sighed dramatically. Dang. That's gotta be awkward for you. Brenda lost the last thread of patience she had. You cannot just cut off our water supply. Do you have any idea what you've done? There are hundreds of people in this community who depend on that water. Jack leaned back against the porch railing, watching his cattle wander lazily across the fields. Well, Brenda, that's a real shame. But here's the thing, you never paid for that water. And since I'm no longer part of your little community, I'm afraid I don't see why I should be handing it out for free. Brenda was seething. This is extortion. Jack chuckled. No, Brenda. What you did to me was extortion. This is just business. Brenda tried to hold on to whatever power she still believed she had. You can't just. Jack cut her off. I can. And I did. But hey, I'm a reasonable man. If your HOA wants to buy water from me, I'll be happy to discuss pricing. Brenda scoffed. Pricing? Jack nodded even though she couldn't see him. Yep. I think a fair number would be, let's say $5 million. Up front. And if you want a monthly plan, well, I'll need $10,000 a month to keep the taps running. The silence that followed was so thick Jack could almost hear Brenda's brain short-circuiting. This is insanity, she finally exploded. You're a petty, small-minded. Jack cut her off again, this time with a yawn. All right, Brenda, I gotta go. Got crops to tend, you know how it is. Give me a call when you're ready to do business. And with that he hung up. By that evening the HOA was in absolute chaos. The community was not handling the water crisis well. People couldn't shower. The golf course was drying up. The fancy fountains at the entrance of the neighborhood had stopped flowing. Even the community pool was already starting to turn a disgusting shade of green. Jack sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, watching from a distance as HOA board members scrambled in a desperate attempt to fix their problem. They had been so arrogant, so sure they could bulldoze over him without consequence. But now they were panicking. The next morning Brenda was back. This time she didn't call. She showed up. She was dressed in business casual, the kind of outfit that screamed, "I think I'm better than you." But the stress lines on her face made it clear she was losing control. She marched right up to Jack's porch, looking 3 seconds away from a breakdown. "Jack," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to talk." Jack took a slow sip of his tea before answering. "Oh, so now you want to talk?" Brenda inhaled sharply, clearly trying to control her temper. "The HOA is willing to negotiate." Jack smiled. "That's great to hear, Brenda. I love doing business." She crossed her arms, glancing back at the news cameras that had started to gather near the HOA office. The story had gone public and people were eating it up. "We can't afford $5 million, she admitted stiffly. Jack scratched his chin. "Well, that's a shame." Brenda exhaled. "But we can pay you $50,000. Jack burst out laughing so hard he nearly spilled his tea. $50,000? You want to buy back your entire community's only water source for the price of a mid-range pickup truck? Brenda's eye twitched. "That's our final offer." Jack set his glass down, stood up and stretched. "All right, Brenda," he said, turning to walk back inside. "Good luck with the drought." She lunged forward. "Wait. You can't just..." Jack held up a hand. "Sure I can. And I will. You have 24 hours to come up with a real offer. After that, price doubles." Brenda's face went red, but she didn't argue. Because she knew. She knew she had no leverage left. She stormed off, muttering under her breath, and Jack chuckled to himself. By that afternoon Jack's lawyer called with news. "The HOA's finances are a mess," he said. "They've been mismanaging funds for years. Residents are already threatening to sue." Jack grinned. "So they can't afford to pay me?" "Not a chance." Jack whistled, leaning against the porch railing. Well, he murmured. "Looks like they're all dried up." The HOA was about to collapse. And Jack? He was just getting started. Brenda Wilkins had always prided herself on control. She controlled the HOA, she controlled the community, and she controlled the rules that made people bend to her will. But standing in front of an angry mob of homeowners demanding answers, she realized something for the first time in her life. She had no control at all. The water crisis had turned the neighborhood into a battlefield. Residents were furious, their perfect little world unraveling in real time. Lawns had dried up, pools were stagnant, laundry was piling up, and worst of all, there was no coffee or ice at the country club. The HOA was in shambles, and Brenda knew the worst part hadn't even hit yet. If they couldn't fix the water problem immediately, people were going to start suing. Jack, on the other hand, was having a fantastic morning. He sat on his porch, enjoying a hearty breakfast while the chaos unfolded. He had won and he knew it. All he had to do was sit back and wait for the inevitable collapse. The first sign of Brenda's breaking point came when she tried to drill a new well. The HOA, in a last-ditch effort, hired a company to dig on what was left of their land. It didn't take long before the bad news arrived. The land was useless for drilling. The rock formations made it impossible to get a steady water source, and any attempt to tap into the old system would require buying the rights from Jack. And Jack wasn't selling. Brenda was now facing the reality that her empire was crumbling, and there was no easy way out. She had to make a choice, admit defeat or go down swinging. True to her nature, she chose the latter. He tried to play one last dirty trick. Jack received an official notice threatening legal action for sabotaging community resources. The letter accused him of deliberate harm, claiming that denying water to families was a violation of local ordinances. Jack didn't even have to call his lawyer before he laughed and tore the letter in half. Brenda must have been desperate if she thought she could scare him into submission with a fake lawsuit. The next day, it was Brenda who received a real lawsuit from her own residents. The homeowners had had enough. They had started digging into the HOA's financial records, and what they found was worse than they imagined. Years of mismanaged funds, outrageous fines, and questionable expenses were exposed. Brenda had been using HOA fees to fund luxury vacations, personal shopping sprees, and even a new car for herself. The moment it hit the news, the entire town was buzzing with outrage. Jack watched from a distance as Brenda tried to contain the damage, but it was too late. The HOA was going bankrupt. She was being sued, the residents were refusing to pay fees, and the bank accounts were frozen. The same people who had once feared her power were now celebrating her downfall. Jack was ready for his final move. The HOA had no money left to fight him. The board members were either resigning or trying to distance themselves from the disaster. And then just when Brenda thought it couldn't get worse, Jack made a move that shattered her completely. He bought the entire HOA at auction. The very organization that had stolen his land, bullied him, and tried to ruin his life? He owned it now. Brenda was speechless when she heard the news. Jack, of all people, was now the HOA president. But what happened next was something no one expected. Jack didn't run the HOA. He abolished it. The first thing he did was announce that there would be no more HOA fees. The ridiculous rules and restrictions that had been used to squeeze money out of residents? Gone. The fines for having the wrong mailbox, for leaving a trash can out for too long, for painting a house the wrong shade of beige? All eliminated. The community erupted into celebration. People had been waiting for years to be free from Brenda's reign, and now they finally were. Some residents even threw parties, blasting music from their yards just because they finally could without some HOA Karen knocking on their door. But Jack wasn't done yet. He personally sent Brenda her eviction notice. The mansion she had lived in, the one she had built using stolen HOA funds, was no longer hers. The land was now Jack's property and he had plans for it. Brenda lost everything. The HOA had collapsed, the lawsuits were piling up, and now she didn't even have a house to hide in. The last time Jack saw her, she was loading boxes into the back of a cheap moving truck, her once perfectly styled hair now a mess, her signature smug expression replaced by pure misery. Jack took one last sip of his tea and tipped his hat as she drove away. But the story didn't end there. With the HOA gone, Jack had one final surprise. He converted the old HOA office and clubhouse into a petting zoo and barbecue restaurant. The same building where Brenda once held meetings to control every detail of people's lives was now filled with kids laughing, animals roaming, and the smell of smoked brisket in the air. The irony was delicious. And as Jack stood there watching the same community that had once been afraid of the HOA now thriving in its absence, he knew one thing for certain. They had messed with the wrong farmer. And he made sure they never forgot it.